Hello everybody, time for another lesson. A very quick one this one. Just a general question that always comes up, either from a student or in the exam, about predicting tropical storms versus predicting earthquakes. Which is easier, which is harder? Well, there is an answer to this question. Predicting tropical storms is a lot easier and a lot more effects can be limited from predicting tropical storms than earthquakes. Simply put, earthquakes can occur any place, any time. Obviously, if you're by a plate boundary, that's more likely. If you're by a trigger zone where they happen more often, that's more likely. And if you're in the middle of a plate away from a plate boundary, then that is less likely. But they can happen. They do happen in the UK, even though the UK is nowhere near a plate boundary. So they're a lot harder to predict. You can do things like seismographs and have that, but ultimately you may only get a few minutes warning, okay? Whereas tropical storms are a lot easier to predict. In terms of timing, you can have several hours, if not days, of a tropical storm if you keep an eye on the ocean where they may take place. Obviously, you know the areas where they're going to take place, where the water is deep enough, warm enough, and the wind is fast enough. But ultimately, you can see a tropical storm forming in the middle of the ocean, and you can predict its path that it's going to travel based on how it started. Now, that gives you maybe a few days, but it's ultimately something better than maybe a few minutes that an earthquake could do. Obviously, this doesn't mean that everyone will survive every tropical storm ever, because tropical storms can be very dangerous. People aren't evacuated in times. LICs maybe can struggle to evacuate people sometimes if the infrastructure isn't in place or the warning systems aren't in place. But overall, earthquakes are a lot harder to predict for and give a lot less time in terms of evacuation and saving lives. Okay? If I want to ask about volcanoes, that's kind of in the middle. Earthquakes are a lot more trigger happy. Don't forget, volcanoes happen from plate movement too, so you get not as much notice either. But comparing earthquakes and tropical storms is a much more likely question, and earthquakes have a lot less time, if you will, between happening and the warning given out. They're a lot more instantaneous, whereas tropical storms can give you a few days, which makes them potentially less dangerous in terms of planning and preparation. That's a question that people ask and does sometimes come up in the exam when comparing different hazards. Hopefully that was useful to you. Have a great day. I'll see you for the next one.